Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chairman and I are in full agreement that you have a Herculean task in front of you, and we need some answers. We really do. Every time we hold a hearing on Sudan, we talk about how the situation has worsened. Despite these public discussions and routine briefings from state, the administration hasn't actually made any tangible progress in improving or solving the problem. Congress continues to show leadership on Sudan, but the administration isn't doing its part. For over 2 years, I've urged the administration to clearly stated Sudan policy. After 27 months of waiting, during which another coup and a civil war was ignited in Sudan, I'm appalled by the administration's continued failure to present a clear, comprehensive plan of action to this committee. Admittedly, that being a difficult task, but it needs to be done. Special Envoy Perriello, it's incumbent upon you to break this cycle of indecision and give us a comprehensive plan. Please, the American people, the Sudanese people, our allies, and this committee need to know how the U.S. will help end the war, thereby also bringing an end to the suffering of millions and holding those responsible to account. This committee also needs to hear how the department is preparing for and mitigating the worst-case scenario. The potential for more significant famine, genocidal acts, state collapse, and fragmentation of fighting backed by more regional proxies are real possibilities. This scenario not only has grave implications for the region, but also for the national security of the United States and our allies. As soon as the conflict began in April, in Sudan, began in April 2023, I repeatedly called for a special envoy. I wrote letters to the president, put out multiple public statements, even led a joint Senate and House resolution, all of which I'd like to enter into the record.
Without objection.
Despite these efforts, it took 10 months for the administration to appoint you. Then you were only given a temporary appointment for 6 months to sidestep the law on special envoys. You have limited resources and a patchwork of support staff assisting you across multiple State Department bureaus. This is not what we called for. Your mission is difficult, no doubt. The administration's response to the crisis in Sudan has been weak. Compared to its efforts in regional crises like Gaza and Ukraine, the administration has shown no leadership and little engagement in Sudan. The emergency diplomacy with Saudi Arabia and Jeddah has repeatedly failed, but you're recommending another round of talks. Well, talks can be important. This committee needs to know why these talks will be different and how you will actually achieve something. I'd also like to understand how your engagement and travels to Europe and the Gulf have yielded a change in approach by our partners to rein in and disrupt the actions of outside actors like the UAE, Iran, and Russia. These actors have descended upon Sudan like vultures, picking away at the last vestiges of the state, extracting the country's precious resources and fueling this war for their own ends. Please don't spend your time today telling us about how bad the situation is. We already know that, and the world knows that. In this limited time today, we need to hear the administration's specific, very specific, actionable plan on how to get out of this crisis and details on how the U.S. will stop the ongoing genocide in Darfur. Can you promise we'll see bold and resolute action from the U.S.? Will you support my resolution that declares the atrocities in Darfur and other parts of Sudan as genocide? Do you support global Magnitsky sanctions on General Hamedi and the RSF for the death and destruction they've caused? If not, we'll be back there in 12 months, counting more lives lost to greed, hatred, and incompetence. This committee, I believe, on both sides of the aisle, are anxious to hear an actual way forward. Again, you have a difficult task. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You conceded here in your testimony that, and congratulated this committee for being the only, if possibly, entity that seems to be really concerned about this and focused on it. Why do you think this is? Why is this being just ignored by the rest of the world?
Senator, it's a great question without a great answer. Certainly, we have trouble getting coverage of Africa for issues related to a false sense of hopelessness in an area that I think has great hope. While certainly the situation in Gaza has gotten a lot of attention in the media, This war had been going on for 6 months before that began, and you still were not seeing coverage, not just in the Western press, but in the African press and the Arab world press. We are certainly doing everything we can to raise the stakes of that. I think it has made it easier for bad actors inside and outside to get away with the atrocities and the support for those atrocities when the world seems not to be watching. Sudanese, of course, are, and they are, with great courage every day, documenting the abuses and expanding efforts to get the attention of the world. And we are certainly trying to ensure that we can amplify those voices wherever we can. But as someone who was in Darfur 20 years ago when the world paid great attention to it, the Bush administration was very engaged. We had celebrities, the media, young people like myself, then not young anymore, that were sneaking across borders to try to document the abuses that were going on. We don't have that same engagement today, and I think that's a tragedy. But I know that you and your staff and others have certainly done everything they can to try to shine more of a light on this, and I wish I had a better answer.
Yeah, and obviously, the problem can't get any help if the world doesn't know about what's going on or is ignoring what's going on. And I think your description is good about how it's changed. Like you said, there were celebrities, there were all kinds of people that were involved in this before. And why have they just lost attention on this? Because it is so bad? Because there just aren't obvious answers here? Because things are too tough to do? I mean, it's hard to swallow. It really is with something as bad as this is going on the planet, and yet you very seldom, if ever, read stories about this.
I completely agree, and this is why we encouraged Senator Booker to come to the camps, encourage all of you to do what you can to draw attention. And I think, in some ways the tragedy, if you go back 5 years ago, was the lack of attention on the moment of hope, when the Sudanese people, led by women and youth, had risen up to push Bashir out of power. They had begun a constitutional transition that would give them control over their own future and destiny. Like all countries, including our own, you don't get it right the first time. There's some skips along the way. And I think at that point, if we had all done a better job of telling the story of that success, I think people would be looking now at the need simply to get back to the trajectory the Sudanese people had already laid out. And that's our baseline in the negotiations. We shouldn't be renegotiating what the Sudanese people have already determined out of great courage, which is a democratic future that begins with a civilian transition and starts to build those aspects of governance. We have incredible, inspiring stories today. While we do see the youth coming across starving, we also see youth who have come up with completely amazing cash apps and built local kitchens inside to provide food and medicine in areas that are hard hit. We have stories of inspiration and of courage. And I think it is a dark mark on all of us, and certainly on the media and on other actors, that we have not had the attention that we deserve on this conflict, and I think that's made it harder. But we are starting to see the heat turned up on those who are committing the atrocities and supporting it.
One of the things that strikes me about all of this is when you look at the map of the 7 or more different military organizations that have the country divided up, I mean, this is tough. And how you get any kind of unanimity between groups that are in power in particular places to give up that power seems to me to be a real heavy lift. Your thoughts?
First of all, Sudan is an incredible country. It's a country of incredible diversity. It's 50 million people. So we have a country that is of enormous size. It's of great strategic importance in terms of its mouth to the Sahel and port access. And so there are many sub-narratives to get into. But I think the most important thing, and something we've really tried to emphasize in the last few months since I began, is that on the issues related to the peace process, the Sudanese people are incredibly united, and we need to reinforce and amplify that unity. Now, on political questions, just like in our own country, you don't expect unity. That's an area where you can have a fight of ideas. But on the core questions for the talks, which is the need to end the war ensure full access, not wanting the war to be a backdoor to power for former corrupt regime officials or Islamist extremists. They want to return to that civilian authority, and they do want a unified professional army under that civilian authority going forward. And these are all core elements that have been discussed before in Sudan and remain, I think, consensus positions, at least across the people. On the questions of long-standing questions, of the center versus the peripheries, of the identity, some of Sudanese political identity. These are very important questions that should play out in the years ahead, but they should play out in the context of that civilian process, not in the context of the negotiations. And so on the core questions for ending the war, I think the Sudanese people are deeply united, and we need to focus on that to end the war, and then work with them on a process where they can continue over many years to discuss and debate those other questions.
Your description is hopeful, but again, I come back to what bothers me is you talk about the Sudanese people wanting what you've described as an ideal situation. My problem is when you got organizations like this, the problem usually lies with the leadership that are in power in various parts of the country and them not wanting to give up that power. How would you address that? How would you describe that as far as the fragmentation of the various groups in the country?
I feel like the Sudanese people have been clear with all of us that they do not feel like the future of Sudan should be decided by the heads of two fighting forces that have horrifically abused the Sudanese people. We are open to a variety of paths forward, but this is not something where the Sudanese people are looking for power sharing between two negative actors. Now, we do see a future for the SAF, the army. It is an official institution of the state, has a proud history as well as some not so proud moments. That is not the same as what we see as an RSF or Janjaweed-based organization. So there is.
What about the rapid support forces? Same. Would you feel the same way about them?
We do not. We do not in terms of their history or their future. We believe that along with the other signatories to earlier peace deals, there needs to be a full integration into one integrated professional army, and that integrated professional army needs to be accountable to a civilian and eventually elected
That's
government.
going to be a heavy lift given the size and the amount of ground that they control right now. To fold them into something that they don't really want. My time's up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.